And I harvested my ice with my iced tea tonight, so that was it. You gotta make that segue. Okay. By the way, there's iced tea back there. Peach tea. Just think Charleston, South Carolina. Peach tea. Atlanta, Peachtree Street too in Atlanta. All right. We're on about here. Thank you for letting me come. I kind of went from left to right in terms of the history of the Red Cross. So I'll kind of walk up here and make a few points and hold up a few artifacts and tell some stories. And I wound up way up over here to this particular picture, which is one of the Israeli hostages being released from Hamas captivity in January of this year. So I kept it kind of current. And I'll kind of weave in how did Clara Barton, who started the Red Cross, American Red Cross, get connected with Hamas? She didn't, but I'll kind of weave that in. All right. I do have a World War II uniform up here. I borrowed your cupboard. I'll kind of weave that in too. My Red Cross experience, I went to St. John Fisher College and got involved as a Red Cross project working with the migrants and seasonal farm workers out in Orleans County. Helped organize blood drives on the campus at Fisher's back in, I graduated in the 70s, 66 to 70. I was doing all this at Fisher. I worked for the National Red Cross in DC as assistant youth director. I didn't like it because it was too much office. And so I was there for a short time. I said, I enjoyed it, but I don't quite fit, okay? Came back to upstate New York and kept involved doing some Red Cross volunteer work. I was a Red Cross youth director here in Rochester for 15 years. In fact, when I first started the Red Cross, was down at Spring Street, which is kind of down where nothing is right now, down some of the Xerox buildings downtown. But now they were on Prince Street, and now they kind of moved away from Prince Street. They have a city office on University, and if it's city, I'll say country. There's another office out on John Street, Henrietta, and then a bunch of chapters around the region. Okay, I've been on a couple of disaster assignments. I kind of mentioned, weave those in. I spent a month in the Appalachian Mountains on a flash flood, and did some work, International Red Cross, although I didn't travel. Would have been fun. I'll kind of weave that in. I'm going to open with a letter. By the way, anybody had, I know we got a Red Cross over here, we chatted. Anybody got Red Cross, you ever have to go to the Red Cross for something? Like, ever need a pint of blood at the hospital? Okay. Did you ever donate blood? Okay, so we're all family. Okay. Take a first aid course, CPR class, teach a first aid course, teach a CPR class. Okay, I teach babysitting at home alone, so I work with little kids. Okay, still do that a little bit. All right. Did you ever, if you were in the service, did you ever have the need to connect with somebody back home? And then oftentimes the Red Cross becomes the middleman or middlewoman on that. Wherever there's American service members overseas or stateside, there's a Red Cross contact at that location. It may be right there, it may be somebody who's farther out, but that's all part of it. I think I better stand back here, kind of bouncing around. All right. So there's some Red Cross connections here in the room. This is a letter to Clara Barton. This is not the original. Oh, by the way, I got a couple of whole history things here too. I can't give them to you, but I thought, because we're a historical society, I kind of leave a couple things in here. All right. Dear Madam, this is in July 1865. I saw a notice in the paper of your effort to ascertain or discover the fate of missing soldiers. I hasten to address you in regard to my son, Eugene. He was a private in the 13th Michigan. He was with Sherman's army, left Atlanta last November with the regiment, became lame after he left there, fell out the first day of December near Louisville, Georgia. We've not seen him since. I'm kind of jumping ahead here. Will you aid me in the search for my beloved but unfortunate son? If so, the prayers and gratitude of a heartbroken mom shall be yours. Please answer without delay and tell me if you know anything concerning him, for this cruel suspense is dreadful. Signed, Mrs. C.A. Osborne, Paw Paw, Michigan. So I'm going to let you think about that letter. How come Clara Barton got a letter from a mom? She's in the D.C. area, and this mom is in Michigan. So I'll walk over here. So Clara, mom and dad, and 5 kids in the family. Dad, and this is important because it kind of fits the work that Clara did. I'm having fun here. Dad was a mill worker, and this is where we're talking Oxford, Michigan. Okay. Dad's a mill worker, he owns a mill, he's got some military experience. He's also a member of the Abolitionist Society in Massachusetts. Mom, homeschool mom, and mom's a suffragette. So mom, this is, we're talking back in the late 1700s. There were 5 kids. Clara was the youngest, born 1821. So roughly 1804 to 1821, they had 5 kids. So mom homeschooled the kids. Go back down to dad for a second. Businessman, lots of connections. Back then, you have to kind of know who your legislators were. And so he knew senators and he knew congressmen from the state of Massachusetts. And so kind of indirectly, Clara got to know who they were too. Homeschooled by mom a suffragette. So very interested in women getting more rights than they had back then. Took a while for the voting rights to kick in, but that's kind of in the back of Clara's head. Kind of got buried, but Susan B. Anthony kind of brought it to life. I'll mention Susan B. when I'm talking here. All right. Can you hear me okay if I don't do, is that mic kind of awkward?
Try holding the mic further away.
Further away? Not here?
Yeah,
All right,
move it.
in my pocket. All right. All right, I can do that. All right. So, thanks for the advice. All right. So Clara, she was born in North Oxford, Massachusetts. 5 kids in the family, mom and dad. All right. And remember I mentioned the background about her parents. When Clara was in her young teens, her big brother, there were 2 boys older than she was, but her brother closer than her age was in an accident. And so Clara, being the youngest and kind of like, this is my big brother, and he kind of spoiled her. So she wound up not homeschooling, but basically staying available to nurse her big brother. That becomes key later on in the whole nursing thing. By the way, Clara never got a nursing degree, but she's credited with being a nurse. Harriet Tubman never had a nursing degree, but she's credited with doing nursing. But you'll see where I'm going with this in a bit. So one day the family doctor comes over to kind of see how the brother's doing, and Clara, she's about 18 years old at the time, taking care of big brother, and she's kind of a quiet girl. And the doctor said, we got to kind of get you loose. Get out of your shell, get to meet other people, you're hanging around the home too long, you ought to teach. Okay, that's what the doctor suggested to mom and dad. So, hey mom. So she went and she taught in the local school. Now, she didn't have a degree, but she had this homeschooling experience, and this kind of taking care of big brother, so she winds up teaching in the local school. For 10 years she taught. Then she went to Clinton Liberal Institute here in New York State, near Utica area, and got her degree. So she's an older student going to college, quote, with 10 years of experience, and picks up her degree. Now she's going back and forth from, it's kind of like, of course, the thruway wasn't around, and the canal was just kind of being dug, so to speak. And so she would travel back and forth by train probably, or wagon really, to home in Massachusetts, back to college in New York State. Her roommate, the girl down the hall, Mary, invited her, if you have a short weekend, you don't go home to see your parents, where do you go? So she hung out with her friend in Bordentown, New Jersey. And Mary and Clara got real tight. Both of them were in the teaching degree area. When they graduated, they went back to Mary's home in Bordentown and thought, well, maybe Clara says, now she's 28, 29 years old, looking for a job. I mean, a real job, even though she had taught for 10 years in this small operation in Massachusetts. And so she's walking down the street one day and she sees these 4 or 5 boys kind of hanging out in the street corner. Hey guys, how come you aren't in school? Oh, we don't go to school. What do you mean? Oh, we don't have a school to go to. Oh, well, so it just kind of bugged Clara and her friend Mary. So there was a school district in town, And there was a superintendent, and there was a school building, but these boys didn't go there. So Mary and Clara walked down and talked to the super and find out what's going on. And they have their degrees. So it turns out that there was like a tuition-paid school, which the street kids didn't go to, couldn't afford it. So Clara says, well, hey, how about we teach these kids? And they convinced the superintendent that we can make that happen. So she has 5 or 6 kids in her class, the two teachers. And after 2 years, they had over 200 kids, boys and girls. And of course, they got more people coming in, and it's getting pretty busy and pretty popular. So Clara figures, well, I've been here a couple of years, I got my degree. She went and talked to the super and said, basically, I'm going to could you hire me as a principal? And the super said no. Why do you suppose? It's a woman. And you can't have a woman in a position like that. So she says, no, fine. She finishes the school year and she left. I have a picture up here of the school in Bordentown, New Jersey. It's called the Clara Barton School, so at least her name is still on the building, no help to the superintendent. So history-wise, we're pushing into 1850 now. Now, this is one pieces of history. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law was passed. And the Fugitive Slave Law, pretty much pushed by the Southern congressmen in the Capitol Congress, that if a slave runs away, he or she should be brought back. If I'm the bounty hunter, and I see, and this is the runaway, I see you 3 ladies walking down the street, I could ask you to help me catch him. If you don't help me, I can arrest you. Okay, ooh. And that got the abolitionists really mad. Because now we got citizens that are being arrested because they refused to help capture this runaway over here. And of course, you didn't have any cameras. So this runaway, 6 foot, 5 foot, dark skin, he matches the written description. Well, maybe, maybe not. Maybe the guy's a free man. Anyways, that's how the Fugitive Slave Law was enacted. Got the abolitionists really mad. Remember, back home, Dad's part of the Abolitionist Society in Massachusetts. So Dad would have been really mad about what was going on with this slave law. 1850. 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin. So that's another piece of information that kind of in the back of Clara's mind, who learned a lot about abolition and slavery growing up as a kid. But now she's looking for a job. And Bordentown isn't that far from D.C. She's a really good writer, good speaker, and probably came out of her shy shell after a while. So she goes to the patent office in D.C. looking for a job. And I guess whatever kind of resume you present back in the mid-1850s, I'm not sure, but she convinced them that I can write really well. Of course, we don't have printers and Xerox machines, so if somebody needs 2 copies of something, she's got to write neat and quick to get 2 copies. And of course, the patent office is just copy of things that you need as a homeowner, as a businessman or woman, whatever it might be. So she's in D.C. She gets a job, and she finds a small apartment not far, like a 3rd floor tenement, apartment number 9, not far from walking distance from the patent office. Not also walking distance from the Capitol. So if you're familiar with D.C., if you live on one side of town, all the Capitol, and now of course the Smithsonian's are down there in that Constitution Mall area, and back then the Washington Monument and Jefferson, and now of course the Vietnam Memorial and the World War II, they're all down there, but they weren't back then. So Clara gets this job, and on off days or on an off afternoon, you might go down to the Congress, Senate, or House and watch your senator, because there are no women there in the Capitol yet, watch your person do his business. Charles Sumner was the senator from Massachusetts. And so back to when she's growing up, she knows Charles Sumner. I emphasize the word, not Sumter, like Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, but there's a connection. You'll see it in a minute. So one day in 1856, Clara is in the Senate chamber watching her man down below, and there's people up in the galley. You can do that. You can do it now too. Although you might need more permission and more background checks to do it now, but back in the day, you just kind of walk in. There's my guy down there, okay. So she's watching, and this other guy comes up, kind of dragging his foot with a cane. And he takes the cane, he whips like this, Charles Sumner, and knocks him unconscious. Which is not the way you conduct business, okay? But what happened was Sumner was talking about abolition, talking about anti-slavery. And this was a Southern congressman who didn't like what he was hearing, and he took it out on Charles Sumner. And Sumner was knocked unconscious, and he was out of office, medical retirement, I guess you'd say, for a couple of years. He came back. So Claire was just appalled at this. But remember what's going on up here. And so she's going back and forth to home, seeing her family. And in 1859, John Brown leads a raid on Harper's Ferry. And she hears about all this in D.C. She's still working there back and forth. Well, a new president comes in, Buchanan. And by this time, Claire had worked her way up to be like the senior clerk in the patent office. Keyword, senior. And so Buchanan cleans house of all the female higher-up workers. Gets laid off. There aren't. So now she's out of job. But, you know, she still go back to home, see family. 1861, Civil War starts. And Lincoln calls for help. 75,000 volunteers. Now, Claire still has this apartment in D.C. And so I point out because to go from Massachusetts, where a lot of the volunteers would come in New York, they got to go through Philly, Baltimore, into D.C. And Baltimore is a southern sympathizing city. And the train comes north into the city, it stops. Then you got to march through town or walk and get on the southernbound train to go to D.C. So all these volunteers are coming into DC, Baltimore from the north. They get off, they march through. They probably don't have no guns. I'm not sure what kind of uniform. Maybe they're just wearing their farm clothes. And they got beat up by the mob in Baltimore. And they got loaded on the train and come down to D.C. Now Claire was down there. And what turns out to be the hospital is the Senate chambers. So they just cleared off of the table. So now the Senate chambers, your desk now becomes some wounded guy there from this riot up in Baltimore. Well, her boys, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, are some of these volunteers. So she gets a bunch of her lady friends together, a few guy friends, and they gather up. You mentioned the yard sale. Okay. You gather up socks, writing materials, pens, crackers, a shirt, pair of pants, a belt maybe, to help these guys who were wounded. Of course, now the Civil War started. And so she winds up doing this a whole lot, gathering supplies for first the wounded in this case. And it works. Well, remember I mentioned she's in third floor, room 9. Well, third floor, room 9, no elevator. You got to haul everything upstairs, put it tuck in the corner, room 9. Pretty soon her bed is like off in a corner like this. So she approaches the landlord and says, how about room 8 and room 7? We need space. Pretty soon she went 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. She got the whole floor. All right, but she got the whole floor, all these supplies. Now the Civil War is now kicking into action. I'm not trying to downplay the Civil War. It was serious. But in D.C., people thought, even the volunteers thought, well, it'll be 30 days and that's it. And so most of the guys who volunteered, 30 days. Well, the first big battle was Bull Run, not far from D.C. And it was a southern win and a northern loss. And a lot of the men who thought they were in for a short time come stumbling back into D.C. And so Clara's work kind of ramped up one because now all these guys are coming back from the battle. It was also not uncommon if it was a Sunday and a battle's going to happen, people actually get in their wagons with a picnic lunch and ride out up on the hill and watch the battle. It's kind of weird, but they did that. And in the case of Bull Run, the soldiers basically retreated through panic, coming back through into D.C., and they bumped into all the picnickers on the way back in. So it's just chaos out there. And Clara's back in D.C., kind of, doing her thing as far as gathering supplies for all these men who were wounded, injured, either from being beat up or wounded from the battle. Lincoln, he was pushed a lot by individuals to free the slaves. And he didn't want to free the slaves. His thing was maintain the Union. But they kind of went 2 and 2 together. And so it was basically convinced that, you know what, and he was convinced in the back of his mind to write what we now call the Emancipation Proclamation. He had a sample of it in September of 1862. But he said to his cabinet, we got to have a win to help out here, help the cause of this emancipation. Antietam Battlefield is also not far from D.C. And Clara, in hearing about these battles, she got permission from some of the generals to go out behind the, back then, if there's a battle about to happen, you've got the infantry, the artillery, the cavalry, the spare ammunition, the spare horses, the spare food. Way in the back, you've got the medical team. Well, if you're a guy going to get shot way up here, by the time help gets there, you're probably dead. And Clara's dad, remember, had some military experience, and had taught Clara how to ride a horse and shoot a gun. Now, she never shot anybody, but she was pretty good around horses and wagons. And so Dad had, in talking these, he was hearing, Clara heard these stories back and forth. We got to move the supplies, the first aid supplies up closer to where the action is. So she got some of the mule drivers late at night, and first they thought she was nuts, but she was a very powerful lady and convinced them that, you know what, we got to move up at night. So at midnight, they moved all these supplies up closer to where the action was. The next couple days, the Antietam, Sharpsburg, Battle of Antietam occurred. And the resources that Clara had were right there. Now, these are bandages and things to help the wounded, and of course, water. No ice, but that would have been great. Oh, they did find ice. They were able to get cold water and ice put in a bucket and kind of, wipe down the guys' foreheads, and maybe, kind of, if there was an arm or leg blown off, some way to tie a tourniquet and stop it. So it worked. And so that impressed the military people to say, okay, if this lady asks us for help, we're going to give her a thumbs up. Also, the Sharpsburg Antietam battle was one that kind of a draw, but the Union felt like it was a win, which prompted Lincoln to kick in the Emancipation Proclamation, activate it. Started January 1863. And so, again, more of this D.C., she's still in the D.C. area. This is all private, her own money, pocket money, or supplies from home, people she knew, people from New York and Massachusetts and New Jersey, bringing all these supplies to town. Help her out. She got no pay for any of this. And of course, she got to pay the rent. This poor guy upstairs, apartments 1 through 9 have been taken over by this crazy lady and all these supplies. The sidebar, that location is open now as a Clara Barton Museum. The building was about to be torn down maybe 10 years ago. And there was a carpenter, two-story carpenter, was up making the last checks on the building before they were going to take it apart. And a historian would love this. He saw a piece of paper hanging down from the ceiling. So he walked over and ladder up, climbed up, moved the ceiling tile, found over 20 boxes of letters and materials back and forth from Clara to the landlord in the 1860s. No, we can't tear this building down. So the ground floor is now a little mini museum. You can walk up the stairs, or you can go around the back, take the elevator. But you walk up the stairs to the 3rd floor, room 9, and there's Clara's office, and it looks like you're stepping into 1860s. They've changed nothing upstairs, okay? Which is kind of cool. I got another piece I'll share in a minute. So anyway, so that building's still there. So that's what business Clara's getting into. When the slaves were freed, emancipation, they could also join the Union Army. So I got black troops, which for some didn't sit well early on. And the black troops could not have a black commander. It would be a white commander with a black troop. And then 54th Massachusetts was a group that, again, some of Clara's boys, she used that term, who were free blacks from Massachusetts, and others. Frederick Douglass was a recruiter for the 54th. His 2 sons joined the 54th. If you watch the movie Glory, you can follow that whole escapade of the 54th marching to Battery Wagner in the Charleston Harbor area. Clara wanted, as a teacher, in the back of her mind, wanted to use her teaching skills. As the slaves were freed off the plantations, there was a need for teachers. A lot of churches and missionary groups went from the north to the south to teach now slaves how to write and read. They'd never been able to do that. Douglas being a huge exception. So Clara jumped on that bandwagon, so to speak, and she was traveling back and forth toward Charleston and Beaufort, South Carolina. When the 54th attacked Battery Wagner, they lost the battle, but they did not run. That was the key thing. The black troops did not run. But the black soldiers who were wounded wound up in Beaufort, and the white soldiers who were wounded wound up in Hilton Head. Clara Barton was at Hilton Head with the white soldiers. Harriet Tubb was at Beaufort with the black soldiers, black wounded soldiers. So they were parallel. They never met each other. But they were working with the same unit, 54th Massachusetts. I just think that's kind of interesting. The whole thing, back then, you couldn't pick up the phone and call somebody. It was all by word of mouth and newspapers. And people wind up rubbing shoulders. Okay. So Claire's, she's like a one-man, her one-lady operation during the Civil War. And she organized volunteers to respond to the need, which is key to the Red Cross going forward. The Sanitary Commission and Christening Commission were two other groups that were active in the Civil War, helping pretty much it was a northern group. The Christening Commission, like the YMCA, that was the forefathers of that. And they put chaplains in with the troops. Both groups had supplies to help out. Dorothea Dix was the superintendent with one of the groups. Louisa May Alcott was a nurse with one of the groups. Ralph Waldo Emerson, interesting people who we know as poets and writers and authors, kind of cut their teeth with Civil War stuff. Okay, so Civil War is kind of winding down, and now that letter pops up. So Clara got an idea. She's going to write to Lincoln, and I can pass this around. This is her penmanship, and I can see why she got a job at the patent office. Okay, but President of the United States, to His Excellency, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, but I most respectfully solicit your authority and endorsement to allow me to act temporarily to reconnect missing soldiers with their loved ones. And how she did it, and by the way, so Lincoln writes back, to the friends of missing persons, Miss Clara Barton has kindly offered to search for the missing prisoners of war. Please address her at Annapolis, giving her name, regiment, and company of any missing prisoner, signed A. Lincoln. So she's got this go-ahead to help repatriate the missing with mom and dad, like the Mrs. in Papua, Michigan. Okay, that's how come the letter was written. Now, how do you do that? Well, you take out an ad in the paper, like the centerfold of the paper. And she was getting letters at apartment number 9, third floor, missing so-and-so, and so she would take out ads, and they're broken down by state and then by unit. Like in the case of Osborne, Michigan, and then his information, or New York, Bennett, okay, or South, whatever, and there was that back and forth. So one day, and this is going on, she had a little mailbox in apartment number 9. And if you go there now to that, you'll see that the hole is huge. So all these letters are pouring in, they couldn't stuff them in there. So they actually had to make the hole bigger in door number 9. It's still there. What was cool, when they found that piece upstairs, they found the original sign. And the sign says, Missing Soldiers, Office 3rd Story, Room 9, Miss Clara Barton. And so that sign one was hanging from the door downstairs, one was inside, and now they're both in that museum under glass. I didn't get to touch it. Would have been kind of cool. So one day, Clara's at her number 9 and knock at the door. This guy shows up, he's got a long trench coat on, and his name is Dorrance, nicknamed Dory Atwater. And Dory Atwater basically says, I hear you're looking for missing soldiers. Yep, I am. Well, I know where there are 12,000. He was at Andersonville. He was recently released from Andersonville. He was in the dead house. His job was to write down the names and information about all the men who died and where they were buried. They're buried by number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just like in a long trench. And he kept 2 copies. One he gave to the Confederates. Remember, Andersonville was a Confederate prison. other one in the side, the lining of his trench coat. So he kind of knew that I got to get this information back home. So he had 12,000 names from the men who died at Andersonville, and they were able to match up. So by the time the Civil War ended, a few years later, they were able to match with Dory's names about 15,000 with other names coming in. Match up. Imagine losing a person like Mrs. Osborne in Papa, Michigan. Where's my son? She's in Michigan. He was last seen in Georgia. And here's the, who knows? Okay. So Clara did that for a couple of years toward the end of the war, the Civil War. Now, this is 1860, so she's only 43 years old. A lot going on. And she's imagine getting tired doing all this. Because she was doing all this with no money, like no pockets at all. So she and Dory went on speaking tours, talking about what they experienced. So here's a copy of a lecture, Miss Clara Barton, the heroine of Andersonville. The soldier's friend who gave her time and fortune during the war, come to this hall at 7 o'clock on April 7th. Subject, scenes of the battlefield. Admission, 25 cents. And all those quarters added up, okay? And so she did that to kind of help pay back what she did. I think never got paid for any of this. Okay, she got tired. And someone said, well, there's the healing waters in Geneva, Switzerland. You ought to go there. Now, let me stop for a second. This piece of history I kind of weave in, but I'll stick it in now. In 1859, the Battle of Solferino in Italy, Franco-Prussian War is going on, and Napoleon is involved in this war. So a guy named Henri Dunant, I got his book over here. Henri Dunant, his picture's on the front here. Okay. He's a businessman. He's Switzerland. Switzerland's a neutral country. Back then, still is now. Okay. And so he was a businessman trying to make some deals with different people, and he heard about, and he was in Solferino, and the day after this battle, he witnesses all these thousands of dead and dying soldiers, and no one helping him out. And he got an idea in the back of his head, in the front of his head, how about an organization that would help the wounded, and maybe the dead, help the wounded in times of battle. And he came up with a name based on a couple things. This is the Swiss flag, okay? White cross on a field of red. So in his honor, when this idea was crafted, the colors were inverted to be a red cross on a field of white. That's where the Red Cross symbol came from, based on Henri Dunant and his work. So he wrote his Memory of Solferino in 1863, and he got 14 or 15, back the countries were called states, and now the names are totally different from what they were back then. But he got all these countries to kind of sign the Geneva Convention. They met in Geneva, Switzerland. So the first Geneva Convention was signed in Geneva, good place for it, and all these states, countries signed it. Basically saying, we will, regardless of color uniform, we're going to help the wounded and basically arrange to have the dead buried. So that's just a piece of history, okay? So Clara goes to Geneva, hears about these healing waters, and she's exhausted, like 1868, 69, 70, that time period. And of course, there's a war going on. And so she can't get away from, people heard about her work in the U.S., so she winds up doing the same kind of work over in Europe, helping just gather stuff for the wounded. And she never met Henri Dunant, but a couple of his associates, they did connect. And she heard about this effort. We now call it the International ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, International Red Cross. But she heard about it, never met Dunant. So she gets exhausted or double exhausted again. People say, well, we got these healing waters in Dansville, New York. You gotta go here. So she comes back to the States, she goes to Dansville. Aha, that's how it winds up. So that's how come she winds up in Dansville. Now we're talking 1870, or mid-1870s. And if you go down to Dansville now, if you drive down 390 going into the valley, across the hill, if the trees, wait for the leaves to drop, you'll see what's called the castle on the hill. It's all a decrepit old building. I wish it would have been a cool place to renovate, which is way far gone. But Dr. Jackson ran a sanitarium health spa in the healing waters of Dansville. And so that's where Clara went. And she lived up on the hill, and then after a while came down to downtown, came down the hill and got an apartment and lived downtown. Well, while she's up on the hill, point of reference here, Jackson's an abolitionist, can't stand slavery. So Clara and Jackson got along pretty well. He had people coming to visit. So like Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony would travel through, make speeches. And Douglas probably did too, because it wasn't that far from Dansville to Rochester or DC area. So she comes downtown, and this idea, this International Red Cross idea, stuck in her head. Got to get organized. And her people in Europe said, you got to get your president to sign the Geneva Convention. And so she organizes some people in town with the idea. They were convinced we can do it. So now she's traveling back and forth to DC from her home in Dansville. At the time, Garfield's the president. But Garfield had been a Union general. She knew Garfield from the Civil War. So that was a plus. Chester Arthur was the vice president. Sadly, Garfield was assassinated. Now, if you go back 15 years before that, Lincoln was assassinated. So she lived through Lincoln's assassination. Now she lives through Garfield's assassination. And so now she gets her all over again with Chester Arthur, convinced them to join the International Red Cross. In the meantime, she organizes the American Red Cross Society, picks up the name and the Red Cross symbol. And in 1881, they organize in Dansville the first chapter in May. Just a sidebar, Rochester's number 2, Syracuse number 3, all in 1881. 1882, Congress approves and signs this agreement, the Geneva Convention agreement. And so in the charter, it reads, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically the Red Cross has 2 obligations. Service to the military, which Clara did, and service in time of natural disaster. Not blood donation, not first aid, not CPR, not swimming, none of that. That kind of evolved as local needs evolved. But the 2 charter obligations, service to military and veterans and their families, and disaster relief. So she organizes this effort in Dansville, and nice, try to sit around and wait for a good disaster to come. And the 2 big disasters that she got involved in were some fires in Michigan, and the biggest one was the Johnstown flood, 1889. And so the Red Cross then would just organize supplies. They would listen to the victims of the disaster and figure out what are your needs and how can we help you out. Okay, all free. Still case now, all free. So the Red Cross money, United Way Red Cross campaign, the donations come to the Red Cross, for the Red Cross purpose. Other agencies are part of the United Way campaign in the fall and in the spring. So the Johnstown flood occurs. And when the flood happened, the dam further upstream collapsed, and it just kind of washed basically the whole city downstream, took out the railroad tracks. And so the Red Cross they're faced with housing for the workers and housing for the victims. So what they did, you picture a boxcar on a train, just the foundation wheels. But how about boxcar is about 4 stories high? And we call it a moving hotel. So they make this hotel on wheels. And so they moved this in, and as they rebuilt the tracks, they would move the hotel a bit closer to where the workers needed housing. Eventually then they set up on ground, not on rail beds, on rail cars, housing for victims, called Red Cross hotels. You got to put something in the newspaper. When they tore it down after the disaster relief effort, the lumber was shipped to DC. In the meantime, Clara is now in Washington, D.C. as president of the American National Red Cross in D.C. And so they needed a warehouse. So all this lumber from Johnstown was shipped to Glen Echo, Maryland, and it becomes the warehouse for the Red Cross operation. She was president for about 25 years. She lived in Dansville. when it started this effort now in D.C., she had need to have a board of directors and some influential people. And the marshal in D.C. was a guy named Frederick Douglass. So she got him to join her board, National Red Cross. Douglass died in 1895. She died in 1912. And so, but she remembered a couple things. Way back in the Civil War, injury, how about first aid? So she had this idea, how about a national first aid society? And she thought about it, I'm kind of paraphrasing it, probably in 1905, 6, and 7. So she's getting on in years, and the idea was hatched, but didn't go anywhere back then. Now, I mentioned a letter. I mentioned Susan B. Anthony. In 1876, Susan B. writes a letter to Clara. I'm so glad you're, remember now, she's been through the Civil War, she's been over in Geneva, now she's in Dansville, and she's recovering from 2 bouts of anxiousness, I'll call it that. I'm so glad you're gaining strength. September 1876. I'm so glad and hope that you yet would like to do as much for women's emancipation as you did for the slaves and the soldiers. How glorious our movement would go on if you had the like of your hand, your brain, and your heart to organize, systematize, vitalize, and marshal its forces. Do get well, my dear friend, and come to the help of the weary and worn in the service of women. So Claire basically writes back and says, well, I got to do this Red Cross thing, but I'll help you out. And so she would go to many, many women's rights efforts, conventions. When the first women's rights efforts in 1848 in Seneca Falls, Claire was in between teaching, and so she wasn't tuned in that, as were Susan B., Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, people like that, and Douglas too. But anyway, so she did connect with Susan B., and they support each other. But she had this Red Cross thing to work on. Okay. Let me jump to a couple of interesting stories that I came across. So the first aid was an idea that Clara had thought about. It didn't go anywhere when she was alive. A guy named Commodore Longfellow, they went way back when they were teaching swimming, they taught dry land swimming. You're basically on a board and you're doing your swimming on dry land and you learn your strokes and then you get in the water. So that's how they got started. Did you ever get a Christmas letter back in the day with a Christmas seal on it and a little cross, which looks like it had a Red Cross connotation? I got one up here from 1913. The Christmas seals in 1913, 14, and 15 was a fundraiser for the Red Cross. And so the Christmas seals, you'll see the Red Cross on it. Later on, they kind of gave it away to tuberculosis. And it kind of went that way. So it was a Red Cross operation when it first started. I like to poke around flea markets. And if I see a box of postcards, I turn it around to see what the stamp is on the back. Okay, but I happen to find this is a American Red Cross canteen in France in World War I, with a letter addressed to a person in Rochester, New York, in February 1919, addressed it to Alice. Send some mail, haven't heard from a long time. Sounds familiar? Okay, like me living in the dorm. Send a mail. I'm tired of dorm food. Love, it's signed the captain in the Allied Expeditionary Forces in France. When a soldier, and I have another postcard I found here, the Red Cross supplied postcards to service members so they could write back and forth. Holdover from the Civil War kind of thing. And so this is a soldier's mail, so it's a free postcard addressed to William Gormley in Warsaw, New York. Now again, this is before zip codes. Just Gormley, Warsaw, New York. And on the back, it's kind of pre-printed and you fill it in because you can't tell too much information about where you're going. Okay? But so the printed part says, the ship on which I sailed has arrived safely overseas. Where? Signed, Gormley Organization 303rd Engineers, American Expeditionary Forces. So this would have been his letting know that mom and dad know, hey, I made it. Okay, and keep the postcards coming. My dad was in the Navy in the Philippines in World War II. He was a PT boat commander. So he sent a postcard home to his mom and dad, my grandparents. And this is the Manila Club Red Cross Rec in Manila. On the back, this is a treasure for me because my dad's handwriting. The strongest thing they serve here is cake and coffee. No booze, no booze. The building at the right is a typical of bunch of Manila, and the building at the right is demolished from the bombing in Manila, the Philippines. A friend of mine gave me envelopes. This is from the American Red Cross in San Francisco. Again, the mailing, it was a free postage, someone else paid for it, from an APO address, which would be the military address in San Francisco, sent to a family in Marion, New York, and with the Red Cross markings on it. So this is a way for the soldiers to keep in touch.
Yeah, but that was airmail, was it marked like that?
No. Somebody found some money. Okay. So when I was the Red Cross youth director in Rochester, kids used to say, well, how big is the Red Cross? So I went to my stamp collection, and I found, I've had this since almost 50 years, I guess. Okay. Rabbit Alley World Map, and it's got stamps. These are Red Cross stamps from all over the world. And each stamp tells a story. So my favorite couple would be blood delivered by camelback in North Africa. Okay. There's the West Coast of Africa Red Cross serpentarium. They raise poisonous snakes for the venom for those that get bit by the poisonous snakes. Okay. Now you saw the Red Cross symbol from Henri Dunant. Some in the Muslim or Islamic tradition would say, well, there's a religious connotation to the cross. So they used a red crescent. It was like a half moon. And it's legitimate symbol, Red Cross, red crescent. Now, Iran, the Shah didn't like any of that. The Shah, he's not around anymore. So the Shah had the royal coat of arms, so it was a red lion and sun. So while the Shah was in power in Iran, it was the red lion and sun. When the Shah was booted out, they took away that symbol. That's the crescent. The other one that pops up is Israel. The Magen David Adom, the Red Star of David. Now the symbols, each society, you should be honored as Henri Dunant neutral. Now, I'm an American citizen. I could not be involved with repatriating prisoners of Hamas or the Panmunjom Bridge in Korea. Okay, because I'm still an American citizen. Not so with the Swiss. So the International Red Cross Swiss nationals are the ones who are involved in refugee connections. Vietnam will be one, Korea, and now Hamas being another one. And so there's still, I think 20 living hostages that Hamas is holding, and there could be 20 or 30 dead hostages. Why they don't, I don't know. But anyways, that's something that we have to deal with. Around here, the Red Cross involvement, disaster relief, is typically small house fires. They also have a program for smoke alarms. So if you have an unworking smoke alarm or don't have one, or not enough, you can contact the Red Cross. They have a whole team of volunteers who will come out and install a smoke alarm. And they do it well, okay. But the reason is, think about this, disaster prevention. If I got a smoke alarm, I could possibly prevent the fire from getting too big. So like the kitchen has a fire, and we got alarms out here, we can contact the appropriate authorities. So they kind of backed into that one smartly. Fires would be one. When I was, one Friday, I was in the office, and the boss came in and he goes, Jerry, you got anything cooking the next 2 or 3 weeks? I go, not anymore. What's up? He says, well, there's this flash flood down in Logan and Mingo County, West Virginia, in the mountains. And we want you to go down there Monday. Okay. So I went to Sears, bought my boots, and flew to Wheeling, West Virginia, and he had made arrangements for a rental car from Wheeling over the mountains to the Justice Motel, paid by the day, and I spent 4 weeks at the Justice Motel, drive through the mountains to the disaster shelter area, and I was the caseworker and also going home visits. And we had 21 days straight, no break. Finally, a day off. Okay, and back then I had worked in rural communities, so the systems aren't that different. And so it's a matter of just dealing with the client who comes in, what's your loss, where did you live, and sometimes I had to go out and visit the site to make sure they really were on the up and up. And there were a couple that were kind of questionable. Now I was just the outside guy. I mean, I was working with locals. Now, they knew everybody. And so I teamed up with the visiting nurses. We went out in the back, the hollers they call them, in the back 40 and check out places. But typically around here, we fires, flood, like that, the water main break here in Rochester. Monroe Avenue, was it, I think? Okay. Perhaps, I don't know, I take a guess here, that if a family got flooded out and they need housing tonight, Red Cross could help out. Okay. They won't get involved with, if you have homeless insurance, that's another deal, but at least you need housing tonight. And so, and the other one, the big one around here would be snow emergencies. You wouldn't know today, but they have shelter arrangements. I'll give an example. Rush Henrietta School District is close to the thruway. They have an agreement with Rush Henrietta. So if the thruway is closed, the nearest shelter would be at the school. And think about this, school's got cafeteria, showers, parking, male and female quarters to sleep, okay, recreation, it's all right there. So they have them all worked out with schools as far as shelters go. And they'll do training to kind of keep, I remember spending a day at Pittsburgh years ago. Pittsburgh Mendon, we use that as a shelter, just as a mock drill kind of thing. I think, blood. Anybody ever donate blood? Okay. Anybody you need blood, you're on the other end, you need blood, okay. The actual liquid, it's free, the liquid. I can't give you a handful of blood. So the testing is that's where the cost comes in. Okay, with the Red Cross, if you donate, like you might have a blood, I'm gonna guess there's a blood drive here in this room a couple times a year, all right? And you can donate blood, and the whole time that you're laying down is probably half hour, 40 minutes. The actual unit it might take 7 or 8 minutes. It's a bag, about this big. Back in the day, it was a glass jar. So if you ever watch MASH, okay, and you see the glass bottles, okay, they kind of go World War II, and so it was a Dr. Drew, Charles Drew, who actually figured out, I can't think of a better word, figured out ABO, positive, negative for testing. And so you could donate I could donate a pint of blood. And if you ever have a jar of Italian dressing in your fridge, and after a while it just kind of settles, and you shake it up, that's what you want to do. Well, your blood does the same thing. I'm paraphrasing, okay? But it settles out. And so different parts of the blood, red cells, white cells, platelets, plasma, or whole blood can help an individual. So you might have heard on MASH when they're talking back and forth, or plasma was the classic. Okay, and Charles Drew figured that out. And so he became the director of the Red Cross, National Red Cross operation. The Red Cross blood program started in Rochester. I've got a picture up here. Unit number 1, National Blood Program, Red Cross. Looks like these guys are picketing. They're actually holding up signs that say Red Cross. They're not picketing. This is on Spring Street, downtown Rochester. Not there anymore. Anyways, Charles Drew died from lack of blood in a car crash because he was black. He was an African-American doctor, and no one wanted to help out. And so, and it's a sad thing. The Red Cross, the military was segregated. Remember I mentioned Clara Barton and Harriet Tubman helping out the black troops and the white troops after Battery Wagner. And the Red Cross, they have a charter with the federal government, so they kind of followed what was going on with Uncle Sam. So that segregation occurred, and so I've got a book up here. It's called Rochester During World War I. You'll notice black Red Cross workers talking to the black troops on the troop trains. Okay, and so they just kind of went with the flow there. Not saying it's right or wrong, I think it's wrong, but it was just the times. After the in World War II, of course, that was beginning to change by stature coming down. But you could also, back in those last model days, it would say donated by a black donor or white donor.
Oh, no.
Now it's done away with, because we all bleed red. So let that one go. Other one that I mentioned, I didn't mention it now, the American Red Cross never charged for coffee and donuts. When the GIs went to Europe, this is a classic, but I hear it less and less because there are fewer GIs alive. But when they went to Europe, and the other Red Cross societies did charge for coffee and donuts in the canteen, or whatever else it was. So they had to come up to an agreement. This decision was made to make everybody charge for coffee and donuts. So my dad, going to the Philippines, U.S. Red Cross Club, would pay for his coffee and donuts. Remember, coffee is the strongest thing they had there. Okay, so the story went, the Red Cross, so some guys coming home didn't like that. I don't blame them. But that's kind of gone by the wayside. Okay, but it was just a couple facts of history that went on there. Hurricane Agnes hit the southern tier around here. So I found it, I like to go to library book sales. We went to a library book sale this past Saturday in Penfield. $5 a bag. 52 books in a Wegmans bag. Oh, that was good. That was good. Anyways, I found this, the flood in the community, and this was the write-up after the Hurricane Agnes. And there's a story in here. I just gave away the book, Mary. The story here of you'll see the Red Cross disaster relief operation going on down there. I spent a couple days volunteering down there, mucking out basements. Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. Red Cross, International Red Cross. Go ahead.
The finance, does each country have to finance their own Red Cross? How does that work?
Okay, question was each country. I'm not sure how the other countries do it. Here in America, it's donations. Now, we talked about first aid CPR. The Red Cross might get a grant to buy mannequins. Okay, and it's a hard, so it's not no strings attached. You get a grant, you go buy mannequins or first aid supplies. But if I go out to respond to a fire and that fire victim needs housing tonight, and maybe they lost their pills, they need some help there, so I can write a voucher for this family that night or tomorrow morning. I'll put them up first. Tomorrow morning we'll come out and talk to you. And if you need a voucher for food, for a week's worth of food, let's say, or the kids lost their clothes, tomorrow's a school day, dad lost his work boots, mom lost her uniform, we can do that. So that's all donated through charity. People donate voluntarily to the Red Cross.
But if the Red Cross goes to a different country,
Okay.
if Americans go to a different country,
Right.
who's going to pay?
Okay. In my case, if I was to ship overseas, like when I traveled from Rochester to Logan and Mingo County, West Virginia, the Red Cross covered my travel. And I was a staff member here, so they kept me on staff. I wasn't doing my work up here, I was down there. But they're all volunteers. And so they actually do cover travel and food out of the donated money that people donate. But in different, these are all different societies. So the Egyptian Red Cross, I'm not sure how they do it in Egypt. My mom was a Canadian Red Cross volunteer after World War II. She grew up in Toronto. And she worked in an office, did clerical work as a volunteer, probably answer phones kind of thing. So I'm not sure how they do it in different countries.
I'm just wondering if each country is responsible, if they have a Red Cross.
Correct.
They're responsible for raising their money.
However they do it in those countries. Some of them may have, as an example, the Red Cross in England, the St. John's Ambulance is the Red Cross. Here we got all kinds of ambulance services, but over there it's the Red Cross. And so however people pay for Red Cross services, ambulance services, it might go that way. I'm just taking a guess.
Would the American Red Cross ever ask a different country for money?
No.
No. Okay.
Now they would ask for help. I'll explain that. There's an international, it kind of goes back to what Clara did, an international tracing service, especially after the Holocaust in World War II. A lot of Germans and Germans and Jews, Poles, Czechs were misplaced, couldn't find. Okay, and so the Red Cross International started a tracing service. So a family in here in America, especially here in Rochester, we have some connections with the Holocaust survivors. They may want to find grandma, grandpa. And so they could send a letter through the American Red Cross, now of course you can do it by phone or email, to the tracing service in Geneva, Switzerland. And they maintain just walls and walls and walls of archives of persons in Germany. So that goes back and forth. If there was an international disaster, a hurricane, let's say, or a tornado, a big hurricane, where we might be sending workers to Louisiana, Hurricane Katrina, but you'd find Mexico real close. Maybe the Caribbean Island Red Cross chapters would be up there. So it kind of depends on the situation. In America, there are Red Cross workers that are trained as volunteers and just ready. And so in my case, I went from Rochester to mountains of West Virginia. A friend of mine went from Rochester to Fort Indian Gap, Pennsylvania, when the Vietnamese refugees were coming back to America, and she used the term donut dollies. Because we talk about the donut dollies in World War II, the USO and the Red Cross kind of ran the canteens. And the girls, women, and men who were the volunteers there were nicknamed the donut dollies, or donut guys, I guess, too. Okay, and they would do that. So my friend Carol was at FIG, Fort Indian Gap, Pennsylvania, as a donut dolly in the 1980s when Saigon was falling. Yeah. Okay. Yes?
You mentioned Rochester was the first place that they collected blood.
Right.
Is there a story behind that? Is it because of U of R, or is it Claire, or what? How did that happen?
The question was why Red Cross, why Rochester? Not Claire was gone by now.
I know.
I would suspect the U of R and the medical field and the Dr. Drew. I don't know his professional affiliations, but he lived between New York and Boston and New York City. So I'm guessing that pick here. Yeah. And there are Red Cross. I'm sorry. There are blood sites where you pay for blood. You don't pay for blood to the Red Cross, but there are different blood banks where you might go and different states or different countries, different counties have a Red Cross or a donor blood bank that you actually pay, paid or free. Okay. I think I covered everything I want to hit on. You're welcome to take a look-see up here. Oh, I know, one more thing. Soldiers. Okay, this is the Geneva Conventions, when a soldier or sailor in the military, Chapter 11, the Geneva Rules. That first Geneva Convention was in 1863, and it helped respond to victims of war, basically on land battle. The Geneva Conventions were updated, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, to include sea battles, and then guerrilla warfare, and then bring up to terrorism. So they just kind of updated things in terms of how to take care of the wounded and the displaced persons, primarily military, but then you wind up with civilians too. Technically, and you can follow this if you want, especially with what's going on in Palestine and Gaza and Hamas, those efforts. You're not supposed to bomb a church, a school, a library, a senior center, none of that. In some cases, they actually have Red Cross markings on those buildings, but they get bombed. So those are civilian sites identified in the Geneva Conventions. Way back some time ago, there's probably 170 countries that signed the Geneva Conventions. Many countries adhere to them, some don't. So I'm always intrigued in this, my interest with the Red Cross is just, okay, what's happening in this case with Hamas, and seeing that story about that person being repatriated kind of thing. But they're not supposed to bomb civilian locations. But we know what happens. Yes, go ahead.
I remember seeing in some old movies where people would go to sell their blood. Did the Red Cross pay people?
No, okay. There are Red Cross blood banks, and there are other blood banks. The Red Cross blood banks, they use the same term, blood bank. You bank your blood. The Red Cross blood banks, the person donates their blood freely, no pay, and that liquid is given to the patient freely. You can also, my wife did this back when she was in college. This is often where you struggling college kid needs some extra money. If there's a blood bank that they basically buy your blood. You sell your blood for, I don't know, $25, $30, okay? And you do that. Now, if you think about that, and just let your mind go, might you be hiding something medically because I need the money? Whereas if you donate your blood to the Red Cross, you're just voluntarily giving it. There's no reason other than just feeling good. Oh, you get sick in the heart. Feeling good about I helped somebody else. There's no money ever here. So there are two different operations going on. And if you have, I guess the suggestion you might come to is if you have the choice of was the blood Red Cross blood or other, you might say, well, if I have the choice, I'll go with Red Cross. At least I know the blood was donated freely. It was typed and checked and checked and checked before it's given back. And they want to be sure that, like I mentioned, that the platelets, that's all you need, that's all you're going to get, or whole blood, or white cells, red cells, plasma. Okay, they want to make that match. So 1 pint can help 3, 4, 5 people, which is kind of cool. Okay, if you do it right every 8 weeks, if you do it right, like the first day of January, well, make it January 2. Okay, and then if you donate you probably get 6 donations in a year, and then you join the Gold Club for donating blood. All right. Yeah, Bob.
Jerry, and you're looking at a Clara Barton. I'm curious. What do you think motivated her? I mean, it's just fascinating.
Yeah.
She spent her entire life.
She spent her whole life with her heart in it. No money at all. I guess it was a heart thing. That's an interesting question. Think about her growing up, taking care of a sick member of the family. Mom and dad, their influence with abolition and suffragettism. I made that up. Okay. And it just going forward, I think it kind of came with it. Yeah, just giving back. Yeah. And of course, she had to make connections, and she knew people, which was helpful. And people appreciated what she did going through there. The 2 pieces of history I brought up here, I do have a copy from World War I of the work of the American Red Cross. This is dated 1917, what the Red Cross did in World War I. The other one, actually, a lady gave this to me in 1910, so Claire hadn't even died yet. This is published by Albert Hubbard in East Aurora, in the community down in East Aurora. And so it's a little history piece about Clara. And then I do have up here Home Hygiene and Care of the Sick, 1917. So I'm sure things have changed. I killed the book. Anybody got any other questions you want to throw at me? Okay. Thank you, Sue. Let me come out. Oh, I should, one more thing, I'll mention this. Why is this terrorism? Okay, it's right there in front of me. During World War II, the Nazis had taken over lots of, Europe, Czechoslovakia especially, in this case. And people in the community in Terezin or Theresienstadt asked the International Red Cross to come and examine one of the concentration camps. And the Red Cross International will check for humanitarian conditions. Okay? So this camp was inspected. However, before they showed up, they fixed up the camp. And so they put up facades, cool looking buildings. They got smooth food smells coming out of the kitchen, kids dressed up, dancing, musical events going on. The whole part of town was fixed up. And they faked out the International Red Cross. Afterwards, they tore it down, went back to concentration camp. So Theresienstadt Voices from the Holocaust, I'll leave the page open. They called it beautification and trickery, okay, pulled off by the Nazis during World War II. So that's why I really put it up here. Hey, thanks for your attention.
Yep.
Okay.